Good morning or afternoon, everyone. It is 12 noon and Central Time here in Dallas, Texas. My name is Tony Mala. I want to welcome you to ASA's Webinar Wednesday. Today with G. Truglia, Why a DTC is Not Always Displayed. This presentation, when the you failed check engine light comes on after you repaired the vehicle, it's not good for you or the vehicle owner. This webinar will help alleviate those types of issues. After viewing this webinar, you will be able to diagnose and repair diagnostic trouble codes, or DTCs, and driveability more efficiently. Again, the latest in a series of Webinar Wednesdays presented by ASA. Again, my name is Tony Mala. I'm the Vice President of Industry Relations here, and I'm joined by Tricia and Leona behind the scenes engineering. And I'm introducing a man who probably needs no introduction. We have been friends for longer than either one of us would care to admit. But Jerry Truglia is today's presenter, a well-known technical trainer and owner of Automotive Technician Training Services. If you haven't seen G out in the field training, you're really not paying attention. He is pretty much everywhere. And welcome, Jerry. We're glad to have you today. Today's webinar, let me give you some tips for the optimal webinar experience before we get started. You've joined this webinar in listen-only mode, which means you are on mute. For those who have dialed in by phone, please be sure to select telephone and enter your audio PIN number in the audio panel to eliminate any possibility of an echo. And before we get started, I want to welcome a few of you. Brad, welcome. Glad you could join us. Darren from Michigan, glad you could join us. And Billy from Missouri. Let's see what we have going here. Again, we will have a question and answer session after the event. If you have any questions, there is a questions box on your control panel. If you click the little box with the arrow pointing in the upper left-hand corner, it will undock it and put it on your screen, make it bigger, a little bit easier to read. Please feel free to submit any questions as we go. We will try to address as many of these questions as we can. If we don't get to a couple of important ones, we're going to share these with Jerry. I'm sure he'll be happy to reach out to you specifically. But to submit a question, simply type it into the chat pane. Again, we'll be gathering and monitoring these things throughout the presentation. If an important one comes up, I'll jump in and ask Jerry on the spot. Otherwise, we will get to them at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, again, why a DTC is not always displayed with Jerry Truglia. Jerry, welcome. Take it away.
You got it, Tony. Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for showing up. We're going to hit on quite a few different things today. And the first thing we're going to say is what's going to be covered in this webcast: the right way to diagnose DTCs and drivability problems. You don't really need a factory scan tool. Now, we got to do this pretty quickly, and I call it in a New York minute. So in case you don't get everything, you could email me, as Tony said, but we'll try to get through this. A lot of good information. Using the scan tools, different modes. So there's a lot of modes. We'll be talking about that. Never erase a DTC. It's like pouring Clorox on a crime scene. Nothing will be revealed unless you use what? And we'll cover and answer that question. Unless you use what? The PIDs you absolutely need to view, case studies, and much more as we go through. Now, the number one tool used for drivability and DTCs is obviously the scan tool. It's the number one thing people pick up. But there's a big question here. If you look at all of the different scan tools I have up on the screen, which one do you want to pick? They're all very good, but we're going to need to go with generic, okay? And we'll talk about that in a minute. You also need a game plan. A game plan is super, super important. Without a game plan, well, I guess the Patriots wouldn't have won the Super Bowl, correct? We need information like on IATN, Identifix, AllData, Mitchell, Autodata, MotoLogic, or even Google and YouTube can be very, very helpful. And I know a lot of you out there use that. You know, sometimes a reflash or a silver bullet problem may spark something in your head. So remember, when looking at a silver bullet, always check and test components before replacing anything. You know, just going there because someone else found the problem and replacing a part is not a good diagnosis. So before we go too deep, let's get the caveats out of the way. When it comes to diagnosing engine performance, DTCs or drivability problems, you need to use a generic scan tool, okay? Generic or global, the same thing. This would expedite your diagnosis. Generic OBD2 scan tools allow us to view information quickly while accessing to pending DTCs, monitors, mode 6, mode 10, and the important freeze frame. You won't get all of this information when you're on the enhanced side of your scan tool. So start with generic and global first before you get into deep. And if you need more PID data or bidirectional control, then you switch over to the Toyota or GM or the enhanced side, as we call it. Also, generic and PID data are the same on every vehicle when we're using generic OBD2. So whether it's a GM, a Toyota, or a BMW, the data PIDs will be easier to understand and are all the same. Now, one other thing, in case you have to go to factory information, and many vehicles we work on need to be reprogrammed, correct? Well, you're going to need to get a J2534 device, such as a DrewTech device, as I showed in one of the pictures. The J2534 device can also double up as a factory scan tool. So go to www.nastf.org and sign up there, and you may need what they call a VSP or LSID, Vehicle Service Professional or locksmith type of license. Fill the information out and send it in. That way, when you replace a PCM or TCM or just about any computer on today's car that's on a CAN bus, you're going to need to have that information to get that thing back online. We're not talking simply about reflashing, we're talking about replacing a bad computer. So now let's get back into it and look at the modes of OBD2. Mode 1 is powertrain diagnostic data. Powertrain data is basically something you've looked at for years. Freeze frame. We cannot forget freeze frame. Freeze frame is important information. It's a picture of what's going on. And DTCs, well, you know those well, and I'm not going to read the rest of the list there. But mode 6 is important. It's non-continuous monitor information. Mode 9, what do we use mode 9 for? Well, hey, mode 9 is super important, okay? And the mode 9 information is going to give us the vehicle VIN. It is also going to allow us to see calibration files. And mode 10, remember the Clorox thing I started with? Well, if you put Clorox on a crime scene, you wouldn't find anything. If you erase DTCs, well, 2011 late model 11s will have mode 10 or 0A. That mode 10 will give us information that is permanently stored in the computer systems. The only way it gets erased is after multiple times of passing the same criteria that failed that DTC, okay? So that is important information you need to know. Now let's look at this generic scan tool here called the eScan and look at the DTCs. P0122, throttle position sensor switch A, circuit low. We also have a P157 O2 sensor, circuit low voltage bank 2 sensor 2. And then we have a random misfire, okay? The random misfire is basically one that we see a lot. But what do you do with the first DTC? When it says circuit low, what does circuit low actually mean? Well, circuit low actually means what? We could have a short. We're not going to go replace the throttle position sensor. And if we had circuit high is going to mean what? Usually an open circuit. So these are things we need to know. And if we see the P0157 O2 sensor circuit low voltage, well, we're going to need to make sure that we could actually have that voltage go up. What are you going to do? You're going to race the vehicle up a bit. You're going to do the brum, brum, brum and see if any of the voltage at the rear O2 works. Now, remember that because when we get to the last case study, we're going to talk about that. And that's very, very important for a drivability problem. And random misfire could be many things. It's a good idea to look at that freeze frame data down there as well. Now, monitors. Now, a lot of people go, well, I'm not in an emission state, so why do I give a you-know-what about monitors? Well, the reason why you want to give a you-know-what about monitors is you see that EVAP monitor? It's not ready. I have the arrow pointing at it. And if it's not ready and you give that back to a customer without stating that on the invoice, they may come back on a Friday night when you want to leave or have somewhere important to go and say, hey, my check engine light's on. I paid you to fix my car. Well, they didn't come in for an EVAP problem, did they? And the check engine light, they don't know if that light is on for the oxygen sensor that you got paid to fix or on for an EVAP problem. So it is important to print the screen like this. These screens that you see in this presentation, I use in my shop. These are real cars that we work on, and we give this information either digitally or printed out in full color for our customers. That way there is no, oh, you didn't tell me. You got the picture, dude. You know, it's all there, so they don't have a problem. Okay. Now, don't get fooled again. Let's look at this carefully here. We have enhanced data, so this would be in on the Chrysler side on this vehicle. And notice we have 189 degrees Fahrenheit. You wouldn't think there's a problem there, right? Well, you ever hear of substituted values or backup mode or limp mode? Sure you have. Now that 189 is a fake reading because look to the screen to the right. You notice it's a -40. That -40 is the same vehicle. Nothing is changed here other than switching from enhanced data to generic OBD2 on this old Genesis scan tool. The -40 tells me right away I have an open circuit. What you need to know is by SAE standards, Society of Automotive Engineers, that generic scan tools cannot substitute a value like enhanced can. Now, of course, there's always exceptions, because before they ever thought of a air-fuel ratio sensor, which did not exist, that's when that rule came in. So be careful if you're on some generic scan tools that still do not display the information for a air-fuel ratio sensor. Now, all these different PIDs here, what PIDs do you pick? But basically what I'm showing you here is there are some important PIDs, like fuel trim PIDs, right? Fuel trim PIDs are super important. We also want to look at oxygen sensor, air fuel. So the nice thing, calculated load, the nice thing about generic is there's not so many of them, right? Because sometimes we can get into enhanced data, engine 1, engine 2, EGR, EVAP, and the list goes on, and you can get confused. But we don't want you to get confused. And the best way to diagnose a check engine light or drivability problem is go with generic OBD2. Even if you use a little code reader, you can do it if it graphs. You can get a lot of information, like calculated load. What do you think the calculated load should be, right? If you do 100% throttle, okay, calculated load better get over 90%, or we have a problem with the engine breathing, whether it's a clogged intake, clogged exhaust, carbon on the valves, whatever. It's an easy way to graph it out on your scan tool. Does that make sense? And moving along to the next screen here, I have the fuel trims all up on the scan tool, a snap-on screen here, and is 1.6 on long-term, even on both sides. Well, you have 0 on one bank and you have 1.6 on the other bank. Is that bad? No, not really, right? It's not really off the limit. So we need to know what good limits are and what bad limits. If that was 10, that'd be a problem. If one side had 0 and the other side had 6, we would have some sort of imbalance on that engine, okay? Now, how many of you heard about fuel trim cell? Because let's take a look at this screen, engine data 1, and this is from a Tech 2. This is an enhanced tool. And the reason why I threw this in here, it's important to know fuel trim cells. Okay, so if you look here, when we are actually purging, you notice the purge is at 15%, isn't it? So 15%, What is the system doing? Long-term fuel trim, minus 14. It's doing the right thing. Rich condition, lean command. The computer is doing that correctly. And also notice what I have there is EGR desired position. If this is at idle, which this vehicle is at, we should be at 0. If it was more than 0, we would have an issue. But how about that fuel trim cell? There you go, well, maybe it's only on the GM Tech 2. Wrong. Let's look at fuel trim cell right here. And this basically is on the Snap-on Zeus. Notice we're in fuel trim cell number 14. Now, why does that make a difference? Why does fuel trim cell 14 or 0 or whatever make a difference? Well, you're going to find out just in a short period of time. Knowing what cell it is going to help us actually know what and where to look for the problem, okay? So there's other good data here, but I'm trying to get you into looking at fuel trim cell. Now here we're on a GDI car, and this is on the Autel unit. Notice they also give us what? Fuel trim cell. And that cell is going to make sense to you just in a second. So let's look at this. And this here is from the Carnegie Learning Institute, the little boxes. And the reason why I put this up is a lot of people have forgotten all about. Remember the click, 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 the 3C GM, yeah, back in 1980 and up when GM started with the computerized control system? Well, they taught us all about this, but a lot of us have forgotten about this. Most mapping systems use a total of 16 cells that include 0 to 15. So when we look at anything that has to do with fuel cells or mapping or computers, you all know 0 to 255, that's a total of 256. 256, 512, 1024. Hey, that's all computer jargon, isn't it? Like the IAC motor that we used to have on cars, moving 0 to 255 positions, and other components as well. So here in fuel trim, we use similar setups. And 0 to 15, a total of 16 cells, are quite common. And if you look at RPM and you look at map or load, you can see the difference here of how we add or subtract fuel by using a fuel trim cell. Now, if you look at this particular setup, this is the eScan. And this is what I use a lot. It's not a commercial, but it's a graphic presentation of where the problem is. Now, the fuel trim cell here, you got absolute throttle is a generic DTC. It's on the left of the screen. On the bottom of the chart is RPM. And you'll notice the boxes are in green. It's color-coded. Well, this is a normal car at idle and all the way up through 100% throttle, meaning pedal to the metal. Well, guess what? This vehicle is running good. We don't have a problem. Other than looking to the left of the screen and 5 monitors are not ready, okay? Now that could be the customer coming back and getting ticked off at you on that Friday night because guess what? When the monitors did run, that's when the check engine light comes on, correct? Now let's look at a problem here. Fuel trim high at the bottom. And look at this vehicle is really high, 22 and 23. Now you're going to start to put that fuel trim cell information I gave you together. This is a low number cell like 0 to 6 is basically going to tell us we have a vacuum leak without guessing, okay? Now look at the top of the screen. Notice there we have green numbers and it all looks good. We don't have a problem with fuel delivery. We have a problem possibly with a vacuum leak at idle, okay? Now look at this one. What's the problem here? We're bad on the bottom. We're bad going through all the way to the top on both banks, bank 1 and bank 2. Now, what does that tell us? Okay, that tells us that we have a problem with what? The problem is with the load sensor most of the time. So meaning this could be a bad mass airflow sensor, a bad map sensor, okay? This is basically something you need to look at. Now, if you had a fuel trim cell number, you didn't own this particular tool, this one is more difficult to find out compared to what we had here. That is a vacuum leak, right? But here we have something that the fuel trim cell, it may tell us a high number, it may tell us a low number. So you wouldn't know where to look. The high number, as we're going to see right here, notice on this screen at the bottom, we're good. We don't have a vacuum leak on both banks, but look at the top. It's a fuel delivery problem. Now, fuel filters nowadays are pretty much non-existent. They're in the tank with the fuel pump, correct? But we could have a clogged fuel filter if it's external or in the tank. We could have a bad fuel pump, or we could have VD, and I'm talking voltage drop here, okay? VD, power or ground side, if we don't have enough voltage going to the thing and it's not grounded right, and I mean the fuel pump, then we got an issue. So this would tell us high numbers like 12 to 16 on the fuel trim chart, correct? And these things are sometimes masked where you don't see a DTC or a directly related DTC. Now look at this. Here I'm giving you the fuel trim hot at idle 0 to 6. We're all in the green. This is good. This is no vacuum leak on this system. None at all. This is a good running vehicle. Now look at this. Fuel trim cells 10 to 16. We're green all the way through. There's absolutely no problem here. Also, I want to make a mention here. I have on the screen, I left this on there on purpose, a little shout out to Dropbox. You know, when we give these screenshots to a customer, we use Dropbox on all our tools, so we can just take a screenshot and either email it to the customer. You know, you've had some management seminars here through ASA. You could send this to the customer. You can print it out. You can save it like we do. We do all of that. This is something that you should use, or a program similar to that. Now let's look at mode 6. This is off an enhanced scan tool on the generic side. So Ford IDS is the Ford factory scan tool made by Teradyne. And the reason why I put this one up here, it's easier to read when it comes to the heater current. So let's look at heater current. Okay, this would be the monitor ID. There's the MID, the monitor ID, the test ID, and the SID, okay, component ID. Now notice the minimum is 0.465 amps. The maximum is 3 amps. So you got to be like a goalpost here in between the both of those to get a reading that passes. Now notice we have 1.642 amps. That means that heater for the oxygen sensor is working good. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you understand that, that is great, because mode 6 is a very big help. What is mode 6? Well, this is not a mode 6 webcast, but let me explain that. Mode 6 is before a pending DTC. Before a pending DTC means if it fails enough times, the DTC is elevated, or the problem, I should say, is elevated to a pending DTC. If it fails in pending twice, it turns into a DTC and a check engine light, right? So just look at that progression. We use mode 6 a lot to predict what is going to happen to that vehicle. And you'll see an example coming up. Okay. Now, here is the Toyota TechStream in its mode 6 generic mode. And you can see they give you, it's like the Fonz, the thumbs up, hey, everything is good, or the thumbs down, oh, it's no good there, right? Well, that no good, and if you notice, it says fail, right? Now let's go over to here. These are the test results. I'm not concerned about Vapor 1 says it's passed. The Purge VSV vacuum switching valve passes. The evap pressure vacuum switching valve passes. But I am concerned about vapor leak number 2. That is where I'm going to concern myself and take my diagnosis to. Why? It passed the other one. I'm not going to put a purge valve in. I'm not going to put a vent valve in this vehicle. I'm going to look at that vapor leak. That's that little round things on their canister. It's the little diaphragms. That's where I would look here. And again, generic OBD2 is definitely the way to go. Even though this is an enhanced tool, I'm on the generic end here looking at mode 6. Now, remember we had mentioned the Clorox. Here's mode 10, okay? 0 hexadecimal A there. And notice this vehicle, someone already erased the code, so we had to go look in permanent DTCs. If you're not using this, you need to use it. Many scan tools have this. Some of them don't work well. Now, I need you to understand this is only on late 2011 model vehicles and up. This is not prior to that. So when someone erased the DTCs prior to a vehicle that has mode 10, well, we're a bit out of luck, aren't we? We're going to need to do a little more homework on that. Okay. So here's the #1 code in the US. I've done many classes on P0420 and its sister P0430, catalyst efficiency below threshold. And I threw a lot of these case studies in here for you, or information, because we don't have much time to do it. I don't want to put a light on in your head. You're not going to become an expert, obviously, in an hour, but we can put some lights on and help each other, right? That's what it's all about. So here, looking at mode 6 data, and this is from the eScan again, you notice here we have the MID, that's the monitor ID, the TID, the test ID, and the SIN, the component ID, catalyst efficiency monitor. Bank 1 has 0.988. 0.988. The minimum is basically 0, and the maximum is 0.723. Well, 0.988, that went way over. That's like someone missing a field goal, isn't it? Now look at the next one down, 0.602, and the maximum there is 0.625. So on bank 2, it's barely passing, isn't it? Now, you could tell the customer, hey, you have an issue here on the bank 2 catalyst. You may want us to take a peek at that, okay? So you may get a DTC, not only for P0420, but for P0430. Now, what do you think about this? Let's look at this. Here's scan data. Now, I gave you the information before. Remember, we went through what does it mean when we're at the bottom and we're high numbers on fuel trim? That's right, a vacuum leak. What does it mean if we're high only on the top? Fuel trim cells, right? 12 to about 16. That means we got a fuel delivery problem. Again, that clogged fuel filter, right? The voltage drop at the fuel pump, a bad fuel pump, obviously. But what does it mean when we're bad all the way through, and especially on both banks? This is a bad mass airflow sensor or load sensor, like a MAP sensor, okay? Sometimes, in rare cases, it could be an air, fuel, or oxygen sensor. 9 out of 10 times, it's a load sensor, okay? So there's the problem there. Now, how many of you use relative compression? Well, here, if you're on Ford, on the toolbox, the IDS has this, and we have a relative compression test. Stop. You're not going to be throwing parts at this car. Why? We got a mechanical problem. That's right, a mechanical problem. And since we have it on bank 2, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 cylinders, right? The fire and order 137, 265, 48, one bank. We could have a jump chain that we had on this particular motor. Okay, it went off by one tooth. Look at the compression on the other cylinders. This is a good way. This is a good test on making your diagnostic test plan. If you don't have a good game plan, remember I said that in the beginning, we're going to have a problem. Here is relative compression on the Toyota Tech Stream factory tool. Now, you don't see nice bar graphs, but you do see the numbers here, and you see what we call superimposed, a straight line going right across rather than lines going up and down indicating we have a bad cylinder. They're superimposed like the old engine analyzer of years ago, the big box scope. When you superimposed all the cylinders from raster or display, they were all what? On one another, correct? Same thing here. But let's say you're on a different car. You're not on a Ford, you're not on a Toyota. You could be on a Porsche. You can be on a GM. Well, here is relative compression via the ATS eScan. And the eScan Pro Elite here is basically allowing us to see relative compression, and you get the same thing, green or red, and you can see the little bars on the bottom or the actual graph, and this can also be blown up to see the voltage drop. Remember, you're measuring this connected directly to the diagnostic link connector, the DLC, right? Now, if you don't have any of these scan tools, we always want to check after the battery. Remember, when you got that game plan, you're going to be looking at the basics first. You want to make sure you have the right battery in the car with the right CCA, cold cranking amps, right? And it cranks over correctly, or everything is going to be off. Now, if you have all that, you can see in this picture here, we have a breakout box. That's an AES breakout box. I have my old Verus on here before the Zeus. We're connected to the DLC, the diagnostic link connector. And the lab scope is hooked up in pin 16, okay? That is battery voltage, pin 4 chassis ground. All we have to do is clear flood the vehicle. Clear flood on this Jeep is a matter of me holding my foot all the way down to the floor. Now, remember, with clear flood, not every vehicle has it. About 90% or so of the vehicles do have this. So be aware of that. We crank it over. We coupled our scope to AC voltage, meaning not DC. The scope is on AC voltage, about 200 millivolts and 200 milliseconds. What we're looking for are even spaces. Don't worry about the little anomaly with a little hair going up. If they're all even and spaced across, you got a good mechanically sound motor in most cases. Now, what's this test? You remember the 90% of calculated load? Now, I'm giving you a lot of things you need to check. But calculated load here, number one, I can use it on any scan tool, even a little launch code reader 6 that we utilize real quick in the shop. Here we're using the eScan because we're actually showing our elevation, the motor size, the temperature, and you notice the red in the background? Based on the information we put in to the scan tool, we should minimally reach the red. Now notice we didn't reach the red. And it's starting to look like Bart Simpson's hairdo over here. When you see Bart Simpson's hairdo, meaning the frequency going up and down, I can tell you that you have a clog. You can't get 5 pounds of dew out of a 1 pound bag. And that's what's happening here. You got a restriction somewhere. It could be carbon on the valves. It could be an exhaust that is bent. It could be a catalytic converter clogged and so on. Okay. Now, if you want to double check that, how many of you out there use a pressure transducer? Well, the pressure transducer right here is basically taking a spark plug out, screwing in the pressure transducer, and what we can see is rather than a good pocket, this pocket should be down and more round. We can see that this pocket goes straight down and a steep rise up, and we got pressure, okay? This would be easier than taking out the air-fuel ratio sensor or oxygen sensor because, Murphy's Law, when you take it out, the bong broke or the thread stripped out, right? And you never, ever want to pop a hole in someone's exhaust system. Not a good idea. Let's look at this Nissan real quick in enhanced data. This is the air-fuel ratio sensor. And do you know if 2.17 on one bank and 2.2 is a good air-fuel ratio sensor reading? Well, if you don't, here's what you need to know. The normal reading is 1.4 volts on an air-fuel ratio sensor. And that's an important thing to write down because unlike an oxygen sensor, the voltage on all of these European and Asian cars, especially the Asian cars, are all over the place. Like Toyota, for example, is 3.3 volts. They couldn't make their mind up and all make it the same. So here on Nissan, we're 1.4. And if you look at this screenshot here on a launch scan tool, we're 1.5, pretty damn close to it. And one thing I do want you to know, the lower the air fuel voltage, the richer the mixture. The higher the voltage, the leaner the mixture. This is a little different than we're normally used to. So please take note of that. Now, I want you to look at this screenshot. We don't have a hell of a lot of time left here. So take a look at it. What do you see? There's engine RPM up top. You got to be careful when you graph. All those up and downs were really not a big difference there. We're roughly at about 700. The oxygen sensor is going from roughly about 100 millivolts up to about 800, switching up and down. Bank 1, sensor 1, excuse me. Now here's the oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 2. It looks like it's going up and down. O2, bank 2, sensor 1 is going up and down. And how about bank 2, sensor 2 looks like a flat line. Now looking at that right away, you should tell me this is going to give you what type of code? You got it, a P0420. We should not have the dithering here on the rear O2, okay? The front should go up and down on bank 1, sensor 1, on bank 2, sensor 1, but the rear should be a steady voltage, whether it's a high number or a low number in between, and we should never have zero. We have 0 volts there. Now, that could be maybe that O2 sensor is dead or what? There's only one rear O2 sensor, right? It's just get you thinking and make you understand what's going on here. So let's move on because we're running out of time. Here we have a efficiency test on the eScan. You can see that the front O2 is basically yellow on one side and green on the other. You can see in the back, the red is the rear O2 on bank 1, and bank 2, it's the bluish color. You can see it's mimicking it. It's going all over. So the efficiency on this scan tool is telling us that that catalytic converter has an issue. You want to be at least 80% efficient, okay? Very important. I recommend doing this at idle, do it at about 2,000 RPMs, and do it at about 3,000 RPMs. The reason for that is many manufacturers test at different RPMs. That means going down the road, different load and stuff, but this you can at least do at idle. Here we have a good O2 sensor. We're going up and down on bank 1 and 2, and look at the rear O2s. One's low, one's high. Don't matter. We're 96 and 100% efficient. There is absolutely no problem on that vehicle. Now, how about time to temperature? You probably never heard of this, but time to temperature, especially if you use an E-scale, tells you you're warming up too slowly. Now, don't worry about that. Oh, I'm not overheating in the car and I'm getting good heat. I'm not freezing up in Maine or up in Alaska or wherever it's cold, okay? This is important. If the thermostat doesn't open at the right pace, we could have problems like transmissions not shifting right, throwing codes. We don't always get a P0128. So be assured that you need to look at time to temperature. There's a good SAE paper on this as well. Here is an example of a good vehicle. Notice the curve, how it goes up here. Notice we're in the green and our time to temperature compared to what we had here. What's happening? The thermostat or the coolant's having an issue. And always use the right pre-mixed, correct antifreeze coolant for the vehicle. And don't forget to use something like airlift to make sure there's no air in there. Now, we're almost done and almost getting time for questions. We got a 2002 Chevy Silverado with a P0300. We mentioned that up front, 300's a random misfire. I want you to look at the screen very carefully. There's a 300, it's our only DTC. This tool also tells us we have a pending DTC. We got a MAP, absolute pressure, performance circuit range problem. We got a lean condition bank 1, P0171, and a P0174 that bank 2 is lean. But where do we start our information? Well, how about looking at freeze frame here? Take a good look at freeze frame, everyone. And I can't give you a lot of time, but I'm just going to give you a little time. Okay. What do you see that sticks out that's telling us there's a problem? Forget about the P0300. If you start diagnosing there, you got an issue. Okay. You're not going to fix this car. Okay. And stay with me. The reason why you're not going to fix it with a P0300, misfires can be many things. It could be mechanical. It could be fuel related. It could be crank sensor related. It could be drivetrain related, something from a transmission, a bind and brake caliper, you know, a drive shaft issue. anything like that can cause a misfire. Fuel, spark, you got it, all of that stuff. What you really need to look at here is the pending DTC. One, very important. And the key here also is looking at fuel trim. Fuel trim long-term, 25%, both banks. What do you think is going to cause both banks? This is why you're getting misfires, right? Both banks. And what was that pending code? MAP absolute pressure, range and performance problem. Remember, a load sensor here is going to give us an issue. Now, look at the E-scan, and what did I say is the problem when we have all these boxes that are pretty high? Most of them are high all the way through. Remember, the bottom was what? Vacuum leak, correct. What was the top? That's right, fuel delivery. What is it when it's bad all the way through? You got it, a load sensor. In this case, it's the MAP that is the issue with this problem. That's why we got a performance problem here. And if you look at that, you see we got 14 inches of vacuum. 14 minus baro, MAP minus baro, 14 minus 29, or barometric at sea level, that is roughly 15 inches of vacuum, which tells us what? The motor should have at least 18 inches of vacuum on this engine. It's an 8-cylinder motor, right? But if we don't have the correct vacuum, we're going to have a problem, right? And it's going to run rich. And we have what? 25% fuel trim. So we have a problem here. The problem was basically after we fixed it. Now, there is the after. Let's look at the before again. Look at the before. We fixed the MAP sensor wiring issue. It was a performance problem. The wiring was the problem. Now you notice it's green all the way through. We're all good. Now you don't want to ship this car yet. Why? Because you don't have all your monitors ready. So always make sure the monitors are all set. So the fix for this was intake gaskets along with a new thermostat. Now, if you noticed with the thermostat, the reason why I bring this up, and I only got a couple of minutes left here, is the temperature was 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Always look at that. This reminds me of articles that I have written on cars that came in where we had Ford misfire problems only when it was cold. You would have to look at the temperature in the freeze frame, and same with Toyota. These were intake manifold gaskets only when the vehicle was cold. So the moral of the story is just don't jump to the DTC. Look at all the information, right? That's the important thing here. Now let's look at our last one here before we switch it back over to Tony. This is a 1999 Toyota RAV4, P0171 lean condition and a P1130. Okay, these two DTCs were found using a health check on this Toyota. The vehicle came in from another shop. There was a whole bunch of stuff changed, including a new air-fuel ratio sensor. Now notice it says air-fuel circuit performance malfunction and system too lean. Now, let's look at the data. Long-term fuel trim, 44.48%. But let's take a look at other information on this car. Now, here's the freeze frame the factory scan tool gives you. Doesn't really give us a lot of information here. Tells us it happened at idle, the load was 43%. But let's take a look at the raw data. What do you notice here? The O2 sensor, bank 1, sensor 2. This means the rear cat. 0 volts. And how about this long-term fuel trim, 6.21? And how about our air-fuel ratio sensor, 3.15? What did I say earlier is a good air-fuel ratio sensor reading? That's right, 3.3 volts. So 3.1, this means it's a condition to be rich. The long-term fuel trim was an issue due to the rear O2 sensor. If you see your rear O2 sensor not moving, and always go brum, 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 hit the pedal and go brum, 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 so you see if the rear O2 oscillates or not. This is not an air-fuel ratio sensor in the rear. It needs to oscillate. So the fix here was replacing the rear O2, and this vehicle was running great after that. Couple of quick things here. If you got an evap leak, like this charcoal canister here to our right, very, very difficult to find that, or a gas tank leak. Why? The smoke you're using is a hydrocarbon base. hydrocarbon will be absorbed by hydrocarbons that are more plentiful, like more gas in the gas tank than the smoke you're putting in. And a charcoal canister's job is to do what? Capture hydrocarbons. So this canister was leaking. The foam we sprayed on after finding it with the ATS leak detector, what did it do? The pink foam turned yellow, showing us a leak. And one last thing to leave you with here is, how many of you guys are using thermal images? You can see we have bad catalytic converters up top, not getting really bright, and we have good catalytic converters on the bottom, being nice and bright. So thermal images can be used for many things, including shorts and stuff. And I want to thank you guys. I'm going to answer some questions here, switch it over to Tony in a second. I want to tell you to check out our TST big event, Saturday, March the 30th in Terrytown, New York. It's a great event, 3 great speakers. We give a free Android tablet out, and hopefully you can go to our website, tstseminars.org, sign up, check it out. And I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to switch it over to you, Tony, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Jerry. Wow, that was a lot of information.
Yeah, I'm tired.
You know, I'm sure. I'm amazed you can do this day in and day out. But actually, a bunch of stuff jumped to mind. We'll get to as many as we can here. But I want to circle back. You had mentioned a couple of times about the permanent storage of DTCs isn't on all model ranges. What model ranges do they start out again? And is that both import and domestic cars?
Okay, so the 2011 late model is where we have Mode 10 storing the DTCs, they're called permanent DTCs. Prior to that, unfortunately, that wasn't there. The HS 3000, which I call the OBD2 Bible from SAE, did not warrant that until a later period of time. And that's when Mode 10 got added.
So 2011 and later is when we should look for that permanent storage capability, right?
That is correct.
Okay, super. And that sounds like a great detective tool. Also, the pending DTCs, I'm stuck on DTCs at the moment, that you mentioned. Is that, it sounds to me like that's a good place to start, and certainly to check when you run into a head scratcher. What can the pending DTCs, what sort of insights can they give you about
Well,
what might be wrong?
Tony, that's a good question. See, on the example, like on that GM, the pending DTCs helped me diagnose and fix that car. Now, again, using an enhanced scan tool, let's say I took my Tech 2 out for that particular vehicle, or the new GDI for the newer GMs, I wouldn't see that. Why? They don't have generic mode on that. Okay. I would have to go in and really know the scan tool, look for fail records. So a pending DTC is already, it failed multiple times in mode 6. Mode 6, think of it as like the quiz. Then you get like the pre-test. The pre-test is the pending DTC. That when it fails 2 to 3 times, depending on a car manufacturer, it's supposed to be 2 by EPA and SAE, it would go into a full DTC at that point. But if I had tunnel vision and I basically looked at just the DTC P0300, I wouldn't have fixed that vehicle. I needed to look at the whole picture. And let's not forget our best friend, freeze frame. That's a snapshot of when something went wrong on the vehicle. Hopefully that helps, Tony.
It does. It does. These are the kinds of little nuggets that we look for in these webinars. Not exactly shortcuts, but just insights that when you do this thing, I don't know, 5 or a million times, you kind of pick up that sort of helps shortcut some of the time necessary to kind of nail down a problem. We all hate throwing parts at cars. It sounds like you've dealt with a couple that have had parts thrown at them quite a few times. But I want to go back to something else you said. When it comes to those printouts that you can generate from these things, I know some of our collision shops that were on previous webinars where we talked about calibrating ADAS and a few other things. They were very insistent, some of the presenters, about making sure that you do a printout of the calibration that you did to document the work that was done. And it seems to me that would be a good idea for any diagnostic work. Do you ever use printouts of before and after a vehicle is repaired to show the customer exactly what they were paying for and how the vehicle is fixed, and to protect yourself from liability going forward?
Yeah, Tony, we definitely do that. Every vehicle that comes in for a diagnosis, we basically give them the pre-scan. So we go through the vehicle, we take those screenshots, we save them in Dropbox. That's why I gave Dropbox a shout out. It's just
Mhm.
easier. We have so many computers in the building. Whether we're on a Porsche factory scan tool or we're on, a generic scan tool, we're going to screenshot it. Even the Snap-on scan tool, since it's connected to the internet and OTC and launch and all of them, we screenshot them. We give the customer before and after. Many people here, unfortunately, not like California where everyone likes digital stuff. Here in New York, we still have a lot of people that want a physical printout. So we print it out in full color for them. It's worth it if you're charging enough. Not that this is a management class, but if you're charging enough, you can afford to print it out in color. And it's impressive, the before and after. I always hold my hand up and say, if it would look good, you had only one finger up when it first came in. Well, that's not good. We have five fingers on our hands. And when I'm done, you got five fingers. That's like their car, right? When it was broken, we show them the broken results. And when it's fixed, we show them the after. It's a great, great seller. I mean, a lot of our customers, whether we text them the message, we also do regular photographs that we also print out. So we document everything. I think documentation, especially nowadays, Tony, is super important. If you're going to charge a good price for your work, you want to give the customer everything that you can possibly give them.
It's true words. I mean, it's all about developing relationships. We say that a lot during the management training, I know, with the customer. But these days, so many consumers really have no idea how these things work. As far as they're concerned, it's magic. And the better you can explain, what it is, that what the services that you just perform for them, and show them some sort of visual representation that they can look at and actually understand. I think it not only helps to, in the consumer's mind, justify the cost they just incurred in getting their vehicle repaired, but it also reinforces, I think, the expertise of the repair shop, in providing that high degree of technical competence that everyone seems to be looking for. So that's good advice.
Yeah.
We got a lot to get to here. Let me see how many more of these I can jam in. You had mentioned, and by the way, we did have one question earlier from, I think it was Andrew, asking about when you were showing the I think it was a Tech 2, an enhanced Tech 2, where you were showing fuel trim. Do you remember which scan tool you were showing back then?
Yes, that was enhanced scan tool with fuel trim with the fuel cell number on it. That was the Tech 2.
That was Tech 2. Okay, great. That's what I thought it
Yeah,
was.
Tech 2
I think I said Tech
factory,
1. I was
the older,
dating
yeah,
myself.
yeah, and that's the older GM factory tool. Tech 1, then Tech 2. That was Tech 2, and now the GDS software.
Gotcha. And that begs the next question. You talked about making sure your scan tools have the capability. How does the shop know if they've had a scan tool for a number of years? How do you know that your scan tool is up to snuff with all these modern systems? What is there any special? I mean, how often should these things be updated, or you should start looking for a replacement? Most computers are obsolete the day you unpack the box. I know. How does it work with scan tools? What's the service life of a scan tool?
Nowadays, the service life of a scan tool is not that long. It's not like years ago with the Snap-on brick or the OTC monitor 2000. Scan tools change rapidly. I mean, Launch is a really good one that constantly changes their scan tools. I probably have like 7 or 8 versions of the Launch scan tool alone. But let's talk about the other scan tools like Snap-on. Their latest scan tools, if you're on the older platforms, they no longer can update the old modus. They're forcing you out. Why? Because they're putting so much more information in. They need faster processes. They need more hard disk space. And it's almost becoming an IT job nowadays, I swear. If it's not updated in the factory scan tool, it's like that Ford IDS. You got to go online and you got to drop in an update in it. The Otis from Volkswagen Audi, that could take a real long time when they do major updates. The last major update, I had to connect it to my 1 gig, hardwire it, because it would take so long. And it did take, a good hour and a half to get their latest and greatest update. So updates are super important no matter what scan tool you have. It's good to update it. They do become obsolete pretty quickly. I mean, you really need to have more than one scan tool in your shop. And don't be surprised. This is not your father's Oldsmobile or Pontiac or Saturn or Plymouth. They're all out of business. You'll be out of business. You need to update or you will evaporate. So you need to spend the money and update your scan tool. Very important, Tony.
Well, that's also good advice. And you had also talked earlier. I had two questions here. One was, you talked a lot about factory values, what it should be. And I know you've done this so often, you've got them right off the top of your head. Someone who's quite not so experienced might have to look this up. Where do you find factory values for comparison?
That becomes difficult. A lot of the scan tool manufacturers, because trying to find that value, years ago, and still in certain cases, GM will give you what scan tool or pin value should be when you pin out a computer, but some of that's hard to find. Usually when I teach my fleet accounts, like New York City MTA and the police department, we get new vehicles in, we fingerprint them. So we basically take screenshots of scan tool data at idle, at 2,500, 30 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, and we keep that data and we can play the comparison game. Now, when you look at other values, what you're going to see on a lot of scan tools nowadays is desired idle, desired throttle, whatever the case may be. When you see desired, that's giving you the factory information right on your scan tool. And if you get into ISTA, that's the BMW factory scan tool. Now, if you're not a European guy, I'll go, oh, who cares? But Honda, you get into a lot of these scan tools, all the information is right there. They're doing guided diagnostics, and they've been doing this for years, meaning they're going to give you wiring diagrams. They're going to give you PID information. They're going to give you a lot of that. And, I was just watching my buddy last night, Jim Moritz, on a Snap-on webcast. And Snap-on, I know because we beta test the scan tool for them, the new one, which I've got the name of already. But looking through it, they're trying to do guided diagnostics by all the information that people utilize. They can get on the internet with it and they can see what fixes it, right? So the information is getting better in your scan tool if you have the latest, greatest scan tools. That's what it's all about.
And this has got to be the last question. We're almost out of time here. And by the way, at some point, you and I got to come back and do a whole webinar just on Mode 6 tricks, okay? But
you got
the VSPs you were talking about earlier, the vehicles, I think it's Vehicle Security Professional or LSID. Correct. That's the NASTIF licensing certification, whatever they call it, that allows a shop to access the reprogramming information and other security sensitive type of things, like buying, security sensitive parts and that sort of thing.
Correct.
Having that VSP or LSID number, you need to have a service information subscription with the vehicle manufacturers, or do you?
No, you don't. I mean, in many cases, they're going to give you, I like the way Toyota does it. Toyota Tech Stream does a great job, because once you try to program there, they give you all the information about what that program file may be about. So, if there's a drivability concern, like compared to a P0101, a mass airflow sensor on a Nissan, well, you're not going to get any information from them other than a TSB if you looked it up, and the only fix for that car is reprogramming it. But Toyota will give you all the particulars. Tony, they go in depth. They do a great job. GM, they just get on their site and, you download the software into it. You needed to do your homework elsewhere. So Toyota, in my opinion, does a very nice job giving you the information up front on what that's going to cover. And there are other companies that do that as well.
Again, the subject for another webinar at some point. Gee, this has been fascinating. I wish we had more time. I want to thank you again from all of us here at ASA, and certainly for all of our members, for another great webinar. Again, we hope you'll come back and do it again sometime.
I will. And if anyone wants a handout of this, if they email me, my information is gt@attstraining.com. I'll be more than glad to send them a PDF out.
Perfect. Will anybody that didn't get that email address, just email us here at ASA, and we will contact G and make sure that he gets it out to you. So Jerry, again, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Let's see, moving forward, we've actually got, next week is going to be busy. We've got 2 webinars coming up closer together, one a special one on Wednesday, February 27th from noon to 1 p.m. Central. The next generation of AMI with Jeff Peavy, the AMI president. AMI is the Automotive Management Institute. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a nonprofit arm of ASA that provides management training. And in this bonus webinar, as part of ASA's Webinar Wednesday series, AMI President Jeff Peavy discusses why engaging with the Automotive Management Institute results in increased net profits for your business. If you intend to stay competitive in this industry, you need to become familiar with the next generation of AMI and what it has to offer. A few key takeaways are going to be what AMI offers to support your business success, statistics on soft skills training and professional development, and much, much more. You can register now. It's open at asashop.org/webinars, again, titled The Next Generation of AMI with Jeff Peavy, AMI President. And you'll even hear about their new relationship with FCA, Fiat Chrysler, and how it benefits the independent repairer. Following that, on Wednesday, March 20th, from noon to 1 p.m., we have our Washington representative, Bob Redding. These are always good. Legislative representative for the Automotive Service Association's Washington, D.C. office. He will be giving us an update on the 2019 state legislative sessions and learn about legislation that will impact shop owners. In addition, we will discuss the first quarter of 2019 and what will be on the legislative agenda that will be of interest to shop owners both on the mechanical and collision fronts. There's lots going on in Washington, D.C. these days, and a whole lot of legislation at the state level that Bob spends a great deal of time monitoring. And again, at the moment, ASA is the only national organization advocating for your rights in the halls of Congress. Please join us on Wednesday, March 20th from noon to 1 p.m. To join Bob Redding to hear all the latest information on what legislation could be affecting you in the days ahead. Registration again is open at asashop.org/webinars. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that ASA's magazine publication, Auto Inc., is now digital and being very widely accepted in the marketplace, we might add. ASA members, just like our Wednesday webinar series, we are working hard to create more great content for you. ASA Auto Inc. is now a digital publication, and you can access it at autoinc.org. You can check out our new blogs, technical tips, access videos and podcasts, and much, much more. Once again, I want to thank Jerry Truglia. Why a DTC is not always displayed was a wonderful presentation. We are recording this session. A recorded session of the webinar will be available soon to ASA members only. If you are not an ASA member and you are listening to this webcast, we would like to have you as part of the family. This is just one example of the many valuable things ASA brings to help drive your success. So feel free to join us. My name is Tony Mala. Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Leona. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time for ASA's Webinar Wednesdays. Have a great day.